Welcome to the adventures of self. Conversations with ordinary and extraordinary people as they explore what it means to be self-expressed. Come on in. Join the adventure. Welcome to the adventures of self. I'd like to welcome Soheyl, Moshki, my good friend. Good to see you today.
Good to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to drop by and to help me inaugurate this podcast, The Adventures of Self.
Fantastic. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks. And it really is a pleasure to have you on as the initial guest. Although this is my focus and my creation, you've been very helpful and instrumental in helping me to launch this, to create this, and to bring this into fruition.
That's a very sweet thing to say, Taylor. It's very humbling, so thank you. It's been good to witness the journey, brother. It's been good.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, thanks. And I want to take time today to really look at and explore what this podcast is about. You know, some of the adventures that you and I have been on individually and collectively, actually. Now that I think about it, the idea behind this, what I'm trying to do, in terms of bringing guests on, and helping, hopefully build a listenership that connects with the ideas behind this. We've known each other for about 4 years, something like that.
I think it was about that. It always feels a little bit longer, but about
it
4
does.
years
It
now.
does feel like we've known each other for many years, and particularly in the last couple of years, we've really worked together on a number of projects. As I think we've gone through our own adventures in our own self-expression, and what's really been beautiful is how we have been aware of, been involved in, been connected to each other's individual adventures, so being supportive and being along sort of for the ride, but also recognizing that, your work's your work, my work's mine, and acknowledging the sort of the sovereignty of not only the glory of what we are able to create, but the sovereignty of when things go bad, which they often can. It's darkest before the dawn, and to bear witness to what it is to go through some of the struggles of self-expression.
For sure. This is, when you put it like that, is obviously brings back memories of all the interplay of adventures as well. Makes me always wonder and be in awe about that.
What do you mean by interplay?
Like your journey, you've been on your journey and I've been on mine, and there's been certain points where we've shared adventures and journeys from our own perspectives, and how it's always come together or lined up. It's been pretty cool to notice that. I hadn't thought about it like that until now.
Yeah, like there's definitely these times where we kind of go off and do our own things, and we come back to, as you say, share adventures, but also to share in the adventures of each other. We're kind of belaboring the point by using the word adventure, because I think both of us really look at what we're doing in our lives as adventures. It really is kind of the foundation for how I look at kind of the life I've lived, even if it's not, off exploring new lands and discovering, new continents in the physical sense. I think adventure can often get pigeonholed into the idea that it has to have that sort of that physical component. It's like, well, an adventure, it's like we've got to go off into the jungle without, with just some sticks and, like very, very little with us or something, not just sticks, I don't know why I said that, but the adventure has a much broader concept. It's as much about our perception of what we're doing, because there can be adventure in, as we both know, in setting up a home.
We dive into that one really quickly. I think just to add to that, like for me, when we keep saying adventure, what it alludes for me is that sense of discovery. So then it's not just the physical. It can even a mental transformation, that can be an adventure in itself. Even an emotional shift can be an adventure in itself. And I think it's a very good point that you've raised. And if we just, I really take value from that, because how life and how every day could be different if you have the outlook that today is going to be an adventure, in the sense that today is just going to be discovery. Today is going to be an unfoldment. Yes, I have plans. Yes, I have things on my to complete list. I call them to complete, as you know, instead of to do. I have things to get done, but still I've not lived this day. It is yet to be lived. It is yet to be discovered. I'm yet to uncover things that I'm not even aware of today. So in that sense, if we really keep that in our awareness and intent, life can really take another dimension, really step into that adventurous way of living.
Yeah, it's really, really beautiful, because one of the definitions or the etymology of adventure is about, sort of like what is to come, right? It comes, I think, from the venture part comes from venire, French or Latin, which is about the future, right? So it's like it's looking to what is to come, and so it has this expectant, but as you say, sort of unknown quality, which is why the intrepid explorers of the 15th, 16th century that were going off in ships to new lands, that they didn't know what was there, and so that was the adventure. It was being in the experience, which is what you talk about. I can think back to when I worked in the corporate world. Although there were, as you say, there were things to do, I had a lot of to-dos with clients or cases or projects and whatever it was, and it was often, there wasn't a lot of really being in the space of it. It was just like racing to get to an endpoint, to do something, or maybe even to complete something. And although we may have to complete, things that we're looking to complete or create in our lives, I think the adventure part comes from really, as you say, like the perspective. It's like, what lens do we have when we have something to do, whether that's renovating a house or taking a trip somewhere, or just some mundane tasks of I've got to get these things for my life or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. With that, what's actually really helped me has been, even if I'm doing a mundane task, to really remind myself, and I don't do it all the time, there's times I forget and whatnot, but as often as I can, to really remind myself, even this boring task or mundane task I may have at hand, is when I'm doing it would be the first time I'm doing that. Even though it's a repeat, it's the first time. We've gone for walks often, especially during the current situation. We've gone for walks, but every time we turn up on that path, it's the first time we're having that walk. It's the same route and it's the same direction perhaps sometimes, and we'll end up at the same coffee shop. But really every time it's the first time that thing is happening, and it's the only time that thing is happening.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think sometimes we each have to catch the other or ourselves in that, because it's too easy, or it's like there's this, well, we show up at 9 a.m. for the walk, and let's just do it, and we'll have a chat, and we'll have a laugh, or we'll have a bitch and moan, or whatever it is. And often, we can start off and 5-10 paces in, or even 50 meters in. It's like, whoa, hold on. Let's just recognize that we are here really to draw ourselves in, to be present in that moment, to be present to the fact that, well, this is a new adventure, even though if we've walked the same steps before, it's the same path, it's the same trail, it's the same woods, same coffee shop, that is a new experience. I just was thinking, that like that is, it reminded me of the Stoics, who I know you're a fan of, or you espouse to Stoic philosophy, and one of the aspects of Stoicism that gets bandied about is the acknowledgement, the recognition that death is always there, right? And some people can say like, oh, that's really morbid. Like, why do you need to think about death? But it's not to focus on death. It's not to ask for or bring death into life. It's to acknowledge that it is always there. That the counterweight of death brings that meaning into life, and to have that awareness that death is always possible, that we're always potentially one step away, one breath away from that. That's what gives meaning, or can bring that sense of adventure into the present. I mean, you were saying even before we started recording, just about the appreciating the ability to, we have an ability to on a weekday afternoon sit down, have a conversation, connect with each other for the pleasure of it, and hopefully something comes of it. But the just acknowledging that is there, that this is something that we to really appreciate that for what it is.
Yeah, very, very good reminder. I mean, that's a big thing for me, right? That attitude. That's actually one of the things that's really shifted my life. When I really took that and adopted that attitude from, when I broke my elbow and fell off a bicycle during a race. I mean, I can share that story again. But really to have that in mind, and, this is absolutely not about, gratitude for gratitude's sake and just to pretend, because there is a real difference in really living something and adopting it fully and just saying it like a tick box. It's the same thing. You can go for a walk, or you can really go for a walk with presence, with with intent. And death is, again, it just adds that, for me anyway, additional dimension to keep me even more present, knowing that it's inevitable. It's written for all of us, as far as we know. It's a very natural thing. What starts must come to an end, and so on, and what ends often dawns a new beginning. But philosophical aspects aside, you can just really put life into perspective. In the face of death, a lot of things that actually have no real value fall away very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. I mean, I had a recent experience by choice, which really took me to that, to seeing and being reminded of how fragile and fleeting life is. And with that view, what really matters then becomes clear in your view, clear in your focus, and you can address that. So keeping that in mind, for me, and certainly people I've spoken to and people I take a reverence towards, can simplify life, and it can make the adventure even sweeter, because then you're even more present to that sense of adventure and discovery.
Yeah, it heightens the experience, I think. People that have near-death experiences talk about, they remember, like down to the millisecond, what's happening, the vibrance of colors, or the specific font of the dashboard as their head's about to crash into it or something, and they come away, and it's like that whole experience heightens their understanding of themselves, their place in the world. And I think what it's not that we're special in this. This is a trend, right? I think there is this movement of mindfulness or awareness, that bringing the presence into the daily, because it is very easy to be overwhelmed or just washed over with the mundane. So much of our lives are frankly quite mundane. Getting up every morning, making our bed, putting clothes on, doing our workout, having breakfast, making a cup of coffee, whatever it is, putting food on the table for the kids, getting them to school. Everybody has their own things that, frankly, those mundane things can really wear you down, and so people look to, oh well, when I have my vacation in 20 weeks or whatever, and I go away for a weekend or a week or 2 weeks, okay, then I can be happy and relaxed and I think this is much about bringing that sense of, well, why can't that be an adventure? And I know people who bring that sense of adventure, with their children. It's like, okay, let's make the morning ritual of getting dressed and getting you off to school an adventure. And sometimes that's a success, and sometimes less so, with the hormones of small children, and their vagaries, but nonetheless, I think it's about as we say, bringing that sense of adventure into life. And I just want to move on, because we sort of belabor the point about adventure, but because we both have also led mundane lives, or I certainly have.
Yeah, well, I can relate to that, right? And can I add?
Yeah, please.
What you were saying about that, I can specifically relate, and this is not about putting a positive spin on everything and making gratitude the only thing there is to do in a day. I think we agree that that's not what either of us is saying, but rather really bringing awareness and presence, and actually auditing own attitudes, like our own attitudes. Where am I today? How am I feeling today? Am I looking at things through the mundane lens, or am I actually recognizing that I'm here at this point in time? And I think that's when the real shift can happen, if we aren't just positive washing things just for the sake of it and just for an outcome, and actually recognizing I am present, I'm here, what's actually going on. And if it's bad, or if it is mundane, even that in itself can be an experience that takes on another dimension. And from the perspective of having led a mundane life, even now some days I can fall into that view. I remember a time when I was 25, working at Ford Motor Company, thought of myself as a very successful engineer, and making 50k as a 25-year-old single guy was really good, but life had become mundane. It was the same thing over and over again. Yes, I did a lot of activities, cycling, climbing, kung fu. I had my life filled with things as a thing to tick off, but it was completely void of that real sense of adventure. Not because it didn't have holidays and it didn't have going around and doing things, but it didn't have that sense of discovery and awe. And I think it's Jason Silver who talks about it a lot, like that sense of awe. How do we capture that in our life? And that's a fundamental to an adventurous outlook on life.
Yeah, and like you say, right, this isn't about sort of positive washing. We have, well, I think you and I'm happy to share any number of examples, have minutes, hours, days, weeks where we're in our shit, where things are, we have a limited sense about what's possible, how we feel about something, and things can, be challenging. Things can be difficult. Like, this is not about, oh, everything's fine, and just be grateful for what you have. As you say, it's like there's an awe of actually, really being with everything that is, that, and it's as much about the awareness of that, because, if things go wrong, it's okay to actually have sadness, to have feelings of anger or frustration, and to really see those for what they are, right? And not to say, okay, well, that's fine, I'm grateful for that, and just imagine it away. It's like because it's it all brings this opportunity. It's awareness is an opportunity for learning and discovery.
Absolutely. It's natural, actually, having those human reactions and responses. If you don't have those, then are you really alive? Yeah. Are you exploring the full range of emotional capacity. So I think it's natural, but it's not about staying there and owning one longer than it needs to be owned, and allowing that flow. Allowing sadness to transform into another emotion, and that to transform into another emotion. Happiness isn't always the goal. Discovery and expansion is. I think even looking at adventure from a sense of how traditionally it's perceived of conquering new land or discovering new land, is very much the same thing. I hazard a bet that the guys who discovered the Arctic or other continents weren't necessarily just always happy. They probably went through a lot of difficulty and through the risk of the ship sinking perhaps and so on, but it was for a purpose of discovery and expansion.
Yeah, I mean, often, you can read reports, I mean, there were threats or real mutiny, running out of food, water, not knowing where you're going. There's also sort of the sort of, neo-colonial kind of concepts of discovery when there may have been native indigenous people on lands for thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. So then you've got, struggles of that. And we're not talking about whether that was right. It's the adventurous spirit, but it's like regardless of those, there was something else, that propelled them, that compelled them to do what they were going to do. Right, the threat of going off to sea that you may never ever come back, for any number of reasons, because you starve, you drown. You die from disease, from war, from you name it. The possibilities didn't stop people from going off for that. And as I wanted to, I sort of alluded this to earlier. I wanted to get to a sense that not only mundane, but I mean, I can certainly look at my life and recall decades, I mean years, but definitely, but probably into decades, I just wasn't happy, and I thought that I was a problem, that the world didn't support me, that my friends and family were against me, that all sorts of things, and I I went through drinking problems, some drug problems, just really quite desperately unhappy. I mean, I considered suicide many times, and that there was something, I think, that kind of compelled me, that's like I wanted a sense of adventure, and I think in some of the things I did, I mean, I'm very fortunate. I grew up in the United States as a white male. Like I was not supremely well off. I mean, it was my mother and I for most of my life. She was, worked as a social worker. We were sort of lower middle class. But, she worked hard, put me into a good school. I had good education. I had good opportunities. And yet, despite all that, some people would say, well, you're selfish, or you didn't understand what you had. But anyway, the fact is, I was in a place where I wasn't acknowledging maybe what I had, and my lens was that I wasn't happy, and that was either because of who I was or what opportunities were given to me in the world. And I think going through personal crisis after personal crisis, eventually, I think the thing that came to me was what my place was in that, and what my, say, responsibility or opportunity was in that. And it's like, yes, I could focus on the things that may have limited me, coming from a divorced family, how my mother treated me, how my father treated me, whatever. And that was a very convenient and perhaps programmed thing for me to go through for a significant portion of life, despite measures of quote unquote success. Having good education, having a good job, being able to travel the world, and yet still being in a sense of, scarcity, limitation. Things aren't there for me. I'm not supported. In the work that you and I do in the creative orientation, I was introduced to, and maybe I think it came from other things. It wasn't just that. It was a path of having awareness and taking responsibility for what it means to be self-directed, to be self-expressed, to to not to. Yeah, I'll just say that for now, and see what that offers to you for further discussion.
I definitely relate to what you're saying, and hear you out. Certainly, I think the idea though is this not a default. Even though this orientation is revealed through that going off on an adventure, right? You ask certain questions, or you face a personal crisis that you just can't handle anymore, perhaps. That leads to the discovery of a different orientation, a different way to how traditionally it's been for an individual. And I think that's really an adventure in itself. When you discover, you mentioned the creative orientation. For anybody, it can be something different, right? We can call it different things, but it's really questioning oneself and one's predominant outlook. You mentioned being from a specific demographic and also feeling specific ways. And I think that adventure of self, right, is really available to anyone and everyone, and it can only be embarked on by that individual. Who's to say what time is right and what time is not? Maybe someone will live this lifetime and never raise some of those questions. And that's cool, right? They've probably had, whatever. They've had a life in their own way, and they will explain, they will describe their adventures in their own way. But what I think we're alluding to, certainly from my understanding, is the adventures can really beckon and can really be inviting through that self-questioning, perhaps, and through that opening, that intention to open up and discover. And I think the mundaneness you mentioned is part of it. We need that to trigger. Like, you said it's always darkest just before dawn. The light is really, I think, brightest because we have an awareness of the darkness. Life is sweeter because we have an awareness of death. I know that's how it is for me.
Yeah, we've talked about sort of like the importance of having, it's like the importance actually of seeing the both sides of that, because it's only because of an opposite that something has its particular quality.
Polarity, right? Paradox. Life is a paradox, and there's polarity at play in everything. Functional, dysfunctional, both present in the same situation, in the same decision, in the same outcome.
And I want to get to sort of the other, because you mentioned it, the other side of the podcast as a title and the idea. So the adventures of self, right? Mm-hmm. So because what is that? I'm going to ask a very loaded question. What does that mean, self?
What does it mean to me?
Yeah, start with that.
Okay. What does it mean to me, self? See, I'm relatively aware of that in itself as an assumption. I'm relatively aware of what the likes of Jung refer to self as a collective consciousness with a positive tone. But self to me is a sovereign state. It's a collated, complete outlook and a way of living from here on out, as in from your center, from my, for each individual from their own center and from their own perspective. And it's a wholeness that's granted when you're born, and it's there with you, and it's up to the individual rather to discover. And I think it's definitely not just our identities, personalities, perceptions that we develop, but it's also our natural abilities and our desires and unique take on life and unique perspective. I've heard it referred to as gifts and talents. I think self contains all of that. So that's what self is to me, and discovery of self or living from that view is really exploring all aspects of myself, all aspects of my mind, my biases as well as my desires, my intentions, my limitations, as well as my capabilities. So I think my view is it's a whole thing. It's a thing that makes us whole. And there's no one aspect of it that we should deny, and there's no one aspect of it that we can deny, because it's there with us. And there's no one aspect of it that we can overly promote, again, from the paradox.
Yeah, cool. And there are a couple of things that come up. It's really nice to hear your view on that, because the couple of things that come up. So, like, part of what I see is, and you kind of alluded to it. So there's the individual self, you know, yourself, myself, and I kind of, for convenience, kind of call that sort of the little s self, and then there's sort of, you know, that Jungian kind of the collective self, with which, you know, just for convenience is maybe the capital S self, and there's a paradox in that, of course, which we can look at. But you're talking more about the individual self and this exploration. This, as you say, it's an opportunity, right? Because we're born with that. I don't know. It's kind of like it's like all the potential, all the, you know, it's like the infinity of what is possible, and you know, we make choices from the moment we're born, even if we're not aware of consciously making choices, or maybe choices are made for us in where we're born and who our family is. I mean, you know, geographically, socioeconomically, racially, you know, all just through, you know, there's so many ways to look at that. But with all that in mind, there is still, you know, it's somebody from one of the most, you know, disadvantaged countries with, you know, in abject poverty, people in that can still, you know, create and express themselves in whatever way they determine. It's not that, you know, I don't think you and I would say that the people that are quote unquote the most successful, the celebrities, the this, that, the other, that they are the pinnacle of self-expression. They may have discovered something or created something in a particular field for themselves, but you know, what is interesting, it's like you're talking about all of that, and also this, you know, one of the things that we look at is, well, even if you're kind of born with a full unconscious sense or opportunity of self, we forget that. You know, we don't see that, right? We quickly, from our socialization, think, yeah, but this is my limitation, this is my only opportunity, and certainly, you know, there are cultural, societal, economic systems in place that limit people's opportunity, but they don't define. They don't ultimately define people's opportunities.
Yeah, I'm just aware it's a very sensitive area to speak about, because it's so ridden with various opinions and perceptions. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think we're alluding to the same idea that self is individual and it's available to everyone, the individual self.
And I think, you know, one of the things that, because you were talking about, you know, self as the sovereign, and you know, sovereignty is an interesting concept, because you know, nations have sovereignty, for instance, and states have sovereignty. And you know, I come from the U.S. and have a legal background where there's this weird concept that the federal government has sovereignty and each individual state has sovereignty, right? And the sovereignty that they have is complementary and sometimes slightly contradictory, which causes troubles and lawsuits. But that we don't really grow up with this sense that you, me, each individual is sovereign in themselves, and yeah, and so what happens is through culture or society, the concept of sovereign and what is sovereign gets put outside of us. So, it's like the state is sovereign, therefore who you are and what you are capable of and what you decide about yourself is dependent on what another sovereign entity allows you to see or think or feel about yourself.
I mean, that's very interesting, right? I've got my own view and perspective on that, and of course I'll share it. And I think that's possibly for two reasons that stand out to me. One, I'd really not like to get into because it's, I'm not the expert on it, and it can divide a lot of people. And there's a desire for that from the outside, from external, whether it's state or whether it's government or whether it's the mayor, whether it's the community, because it eliminates the idea that anybody could go against the betterment of that community. So there's a pull to place sovereignty outside of the individual. The other side, which I can absolutely relate to, and I think everybody could relate to if they look at it and with an open mind, is that internal willingness to put sovereignty outside. So this is what I said, there's two aspects. There's the outside pull and there's the inside push. And I think, or I sense, certainly from what I can relate to, the ability to escape responsibility that gives someone. If we put sovereignty outside of ourselves, then it's somebody else who's going to look after us, it's somebody else who's going to make a decision for us, it's somebody else's fault if things don't go right. So then it can be a welcome thing. And I've seen it in the corporate world. It's very easy to blame other departments and other managers, and it's very easy for an employee to blame the manager for a lack of clear direction. And of course, from a managerial perspective, for example, it's possibly good to take full responsibility, because then an individual can't sway the project in their way, whatever that is. So I think that's two aspects of why sovereignty is, I don't want to say forgotten, but it's given away. One is pulled away from us, and one is pushed away by us. And if we just look at that, because really only one of them, whilst both of them we allow, is really one that's in our control. And it's really one that we have decision over. And that's the one that we give away, we willingly give away. And I think what's really worked for me is to question that. Is something truly my decision? And of course it takes work. I don't think anybody just wakes up in the morning and all of a sudden like, okay, today I'm going to be sovereign in my life, and that is it. Because it also comes with a lot of negative connotations. Like, it's very easy to be labeled selfish or inconsiderate, and so on and so forth, And again, this is an ideology we're sharing, we're not promoting be sovereign and hold a gun and go out and do whatever you wish. It's not about harming anybody, but it's about holding your center, holding yourself as complete and whole, and really assessing your own views and your own decisions and your own opinions for no other reason other than to actually discover more of yourself. How much of someone's opinion is informed by the external and not really evaluated internally from their own whatever biases. So I think that's my take on it.
Yeah, and as you speak, I recognize it is a sensitive area, and one part of like the way I resolve that in a way, because I'm aware, certainly coming from an American background, a lot of the concept around sovereignty kind of devolves into individuality, and what I want, or then that's all the only important thing. And I think that is it's only looking at half the side of the equation, because it's only looking at that, say that, as I was saying before, that little s self, because for me you have to put that in context with the larger whole. Yes, we are sovereign as individuals, and it fits into a larger, global, universal context. So that sort of large capital S self, and there's a paradox in that. It's like, well, there's sovereignty in self, and then we also are. We do fit into an interconnected, interdependent world at every step of the way, and having awareness of, it's like my sovereignty is also about acknowledging your sovereignty, right? So my sovereignty is not about taking you over and denying anything about you. That when two sovereign people meet and acknowledge that, it's like they just meet, right? That and you can stand in sort of two sovereign bubbles or circles or whatever it is, in wholeness, right? So it's not about proving you wrong or proving me right, or taking something from you because that's my sovereign desire. That there's, it is much more about this, kind of like awareness and exploration of self-expression and sovereignty, but in the context of what that means. It's like, the universe is not just me, right? There are certainly 8 billion people on this planet, and a gazillion worlds and stars and other things out there that all fit into that. And I know that, I kind of trip myself up because it's holding a paradox, right? And that's, some of the work we do, right? It's like, how do you hold a paradox? Because you're holding essentially two seemingly logically opposed things, but for me, that they have to be there. The light and the dark. It's like there are these brief moments where they kind of come together, dusk, dawn, whatever. But they're so fleeting, and it's the the sovereignty of night gives way to the sovereignty of day, right? Not that one is better than the other, and that we have to have both of those to have one of them.
Yeah, they do go hand in hand. I think, just a word of warning, things can really get sticky when that has to be resolved for someone, or someone wants to bring resolution to that. Holding a paradox without needing it to resolve, I think, is the most powerful thing, because then you can allow space for the truth that sits in the middle to actually emerge. But I think as humans, as a community, as individuals, we've been taught not to do that. Everything has to be definitive. Everything has to have an answer. So we don't really hold paradoxes. It has to resolve. And that's tension, that's inherent tension. It has to resolve, and it will resolve. But sometimes we, as individuals or as a collective, pursue resolution of things. And by that, I don't mean resolution of war. I mean like a response to the paradox. We try and create favoritism and a decision far too quickly, and take away from that space where the truth can be revealed from behind the veils,
Yeah, that sense of everything needs to be defined, and definition on the one hand is helpful, because it's nice to know that I've defined whatever, the top drawer is for the socks, right? That's not sort of changing every day, but we're talking about a more sort of abstract concept about paradox, and I just lost what I was
Whilst you're
going
with
to say.
that, if I can just say, like with definition can be useful, but again, it's only useful if we recognize it's a very individual thing. We all need definition, but it's a definition we come to from ourselves, for ourselves. From ourselves, for ourselves. The definitions you come up with and you conclude with, they serve you. The problem arises when we try and share definitions to shortcut, and we put it on each other, and we expect each other to take it on. You allocate your top drawer for socks, for example, right? So that's your definition, and that serves you in your life, in your sovereign journey. That doesn't necessarily mean everybody else has to go along with that, because it's a societal norm and it's going to serve everyone. It may not. Do you see where I'm going with this? So its definition is essential because it can give meaning. There's like, and that's another paradox. Like meaning, the meaning we give to things can really trip us up. Somebody does something, we make it mean that we're not lovable, and we derail ourselves. But then also meaning can be a positive, can give color. It's like meaning of family. It means there's love. It means there's warmth. So meaning itself is about everything is paradox. Meaning is a paradox, and meaning is kind of an aspect of definition. We define things. We give meaning to things. But again, it's from self for self. It's from us for us, from our own experiences, for our own path going forward. And it's a beautiful thing if everybody can really leverage that and really adopt that. The problems, look at the state of the world, the problems we face is because meaning is assumed by an individual or a state or a collective, and then it's enforced on others. That's where that capital S can often be confused, because the capital S is lots of little S's working synergistically, harmoniously, truthfully, being able to see your definition as serving you and my definition serving me. But capital S is often confused for, we come up with a collective meaning, that's the definition of, or, with a collective meaning that we all have to agree to. And that's how democracy is. If 51% of us wants one thing, the other 49 has to. And I think that's where it can break down, and it doesn't necessarily serve everybody, because it's about serving everyone, not just serving the majority.
Yeah, and I was thinking this concept of definition. Yes, definition is useful. It has its purpose, but it's not the end all be all, right? And there is a tendency, and this has been talked about in other forums, about how a lot of professional fields or academic fields, and just everything, right? Everything's become so specialized, defined, that we forget about the kind of capital S self, or whether it's the body, whether it's organizations, and it's about, okay, well, the marketing department is going to do this, the physics department is going to go down these, hyper defined individual senses of understanding. And although it's useful to have more understanding about how a cell works, how the whatever it is that's being studied or looked at, how the universe works, how it's not the only, it's not like, okay, that's it, we've defined it, and we can settle that argument or discussion and move on, and that, because it takes away from openness, it takes away from possibility, it takes away from mystery, and the last sort of 300-400 years, the Enlightened era, so-called, is about the predominance of science, not science as a pursuit of real understanding and being open, of that adventurous sense of exploring and never really knowing. Science is about hypotheses and exploring things, and even people are like, well, gravity, but gravity's a theory, right? I'm not saying that it's not borne out, but these things, it's not like, okay, we've defined and this is the law and that's it. It's settled, because we're always uncovering new things. Less than 100 years ago, the entire universe, as humanity understood it, was the solar system. And it was only as Edward Hubble created telescopes big enough in the 1920s to actually be able to see galaxies outside of, sorry, not the solar system, the galaxy, Milky Way galaxy. It was only as Hubble developed telescopes that we could see galaxies outside of our own, that our sense of what the universe is expanded. And now I love that picture that kind of went around a few years ago of like this network kind of fibrous look at where where the Milky Way is in the galaxy of galaxies, and it's on this sort of little end thread down towards the bottom of this branch of the Virgo cluster of galaxies or something, and that's just happened in 100 years, and I go back to, say, pre-Enlightenment, when there was still a general understanding of and appreciation for mystery, for magic, and I don't mean kind of magic in the kind of illusion, kind of magician on a stage, but that the world is magic. For all our understanding of science, we still don't understand how an acorn becomes an oak. We don't understand how, where the universe started. We don't understand how thought begins. There's so many things, and rather than feeling like we have to get to that point, that we have lost that sense, which is a paradox. Like, we can know things and also not know things, and there's a beauty in that paradox.
Let's just touch on magic really quickly, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is an area I have a real deep interest in with, Hermetic philosophy and alchemy. And you mentioned did you say the golden era, past 300-400 years? The enlightened, right? You mentioned the enlightened era.
So-called,
the
yes.
So-called enlightened era. Because it's interesting, that's actually the past 300-400 years. That's when really science took center stage, whereas until then, science and religion in the sense of the mystical, the magical, the alchemical aspect of things, where really magic and creativity were, the concepts of God and the enlightened and the creator, as well, the real mystical and the scientific well-defined things, they were together and hand in hand. And the past 300-400 years is really when science took over and the other side was suppressed. Now, I'm not going to go into that. I don't think this is the space to go into that. We can have an offline conversation about that. But it was just really interesting you said that, because the so-called enlightened years has actually been devoid of the mystical elements.
Well, more and more,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like how do we cut that off? And I would say that, like, you're cutting off part of yourself, right? That we have these. There's a part of us, we can look at it as our human side, our little s self side does appreciate definition. Definition's very useful and helpful, but it's not the only thing. And when that's not balanced and acknowledged along with that mystical, ineffable, ethereal sense that we can never fully understand, it loses. It's like then it's just like, well, then there's just sunlight and moonlight doesn't exist, or night darkness doesn't exist, right? To me it's unnatural.
Yeah, exactly, and then that's when sovereignty is on the question, because you only have half the picture, half truths.
Yeah, and you opened the door to mysticism, and maybe I did with reference to mystical and magical, because I think I read a lot of and appreciate a lot of Joseph Campbell, who talks about this, and the ineffable, whether you want to call it God, Spirit, Allah, the great flying spaghetti monster, whatever it is that that you connect with, regardless of you can call yourself an atheist or whatever religion, there is something that is not only beyond it's beyond descriptions, beyond understanding, this life, this experience, and rather than trying to define it, to limit it, to name it, we've lost that ability to just say it just is. That appreciation, you're going back to your sense of the awe and wonder that, this just is. And I think from memory, Campbell talks about the ineffable, and one of his mentors, Zimmerman or somebody, German writer, talked about this, that what we, the ineffable is beyond words, right? And the closest approximation to it is probably art, because it is an emotional, abstract representation of that. And then further, further away from that, and a more limiting sense is through words. And then we try to explain in language what is beyond the understanding of mortal minds. And rather than just holding that and saying, well, that's there, isn't that beautiful? Isn't that what makes this, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, isn't that what makes this life so amazing, that we actually are here, that we have the opportunity to have this experience, regardless of what our circumstances are, and having, I think there are many examples of people that throughout history that have had incredibly challenging experiences, been oppressed and in horrible circumstances, but their connection, whether it's to their religion or to a sense of that mystical sense, is what gives them peace, openness, and possibility in regardless of what circumstances are. Anyway, that's cue for you to talk about mysticism, if you so choose.
Yeah, fascinating. I think with what you said, one of the things that really points me to is the idea that, look, I don't personally have an interest in needing to add definition to certain things, but for someone, that is their adventure. Like for a scientist, that must be their adventure. They want to explore and they want to define and understand, and that's their expression and that's their adventure. But that's an individual. Again, that's an individual thing. For me, my interest in mysticism is, as you know, how it adds dimension to the self. Because I think it's a frontier that everyone's always expanding, and we all take an interest in, or certainly I take a big interest in, of what makes us tick. And I'm not talking about our motivations from a day-to-day perspective, but life itself, what motivates our desires, but also our gifts, our talents, and contribution. And what I mean by that is our contribution to the big S. What really gives rise to that little s that contributes to the big S.
Yeah. I mean, you can look at it. I mean, one metaphor that's popular, it's like we are a drop in the ocean, right? But it takes however many infinite number of drops to make up the ocean, from little s to big S self. I was thinking you said about, yes, there are, for a scientist, there is that desire to define things, but and it'd be interesting to hear your perspective as an engineer, because that's there's also this idea of, like, let me figure this out, let me understand this. But the great scientists of over the centuries have not tried to say, and this is the end, right? The Newtons, the Einsteins, Richard Feynman, right? They have a particular understanding. They have a model, and they have an infinite respect for what they don't understand, and what they believe cannot possibly be understood. If you really, a lot of quotes are misattributed to Einstein, but he did have an incredible sense of awe for what is, right? And he came up with theory of relativity, but that never took away his awe for the ineffable, for what it is that we live in. Richard Feynman, very much the same way. Newton, considered the great rational scientist, was an alchemist, and much of what he and not an alchemist in the sense of trying to literally turn lead into gold, but understanding how spiritual alchemy of how we transform, of how we learn, of our understanding of our little s self in the larger big S self.
I agree. What's the question?
I don't know. There was
Okay.
I think I was just,
it's interesting. I do agree, and I completely appreciate what you said. Just one thing I would, I guess, as a note to add, and probably going to get slayed by a lot of scientists and engineers, is it's very easy to batch those two together, and traditionally they are defined together, but I actually think they're quite different. Where science is really definition focused and understanding focused and categorizing focused. And it's not like, I think there's an absolute value in that, right? It contributes to societal understanding of things on a deeper level, particularly if anybody has a specific interest. I think that science and engineering is really the active element of that. And I think it does stand on its own. It's the active element of creating solutions, understanding how something works, not just for the sake of understanding, but actually to improve or to adjust or to make different or to create a different version of it.
But don't you think that is actually the goal of science as well?
I don't know, but personally, from my understanding of it, I wouldn't say so. I think science is a lot more, and again, this is what I said, I'd be slayed, right? But I'm open to it. I think science is a lot more about defining things and creating definitions. Like, what's an active element of science? I mean, this sounds super ignorant. I'm aware of it. The field of medicine, that's obviously science, not engineering. And there's an active aspect to it. But my view on that is that's not engineering. That's, we could define it, science and engineering. It's very easy to put it in one thing.
Well, there are many people who say that like modern medicine is
engineering.
looking to be engineering.
That's my view. I didn't realize that was the case, but that is my view. The active element of discovery and pursuit is a lot more engineering than science. Like, I mean, even in science, we have bioengineering. It's called bioengineering. So it's not, it's bioengineering. So engineering is the active element. So it's the, I dare say, the adventurous element, right? Nothing against either, obviously. Really appreciate both. But engineering is about creating solutions, and it lends itself to active expansion of what's out there, what else can we do. Whereas my limited perspective and my limited view is probably that science is looking at the here and now. And again, I'm sure there'll be thousands and millions of people who would say different. Science is about out there and discovering that and defining that. But again, it's definition focused. And once you define something, that's it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there is a tension in that. And, one of the, future episodes here, we're going to be talking to a scientist, a medical doctor, about that, that issue, right? That definition side versus the, exploration, the adventure side of medicine, so stay tuned for an episode.
That was not planned. That was pretty cool.
With my good friend Nicole Freris, who has that understanding, comes from that scientific background, but brings the sense of mystery and fitting that into a larger sense of self. Cool. Well, I think we've explored quite a bit today, and I really want to thank you for taking time. It's as always been an interesting and adventurous exploration with you. I don't think we knew exactly where we were going to go, but we certainly had a sense of kind of what we wanted to explore, the kind of the realms we wanted to explore, and I think we've done that. I really want to thank you for for stopping by to really help launch this adventure. And I'd love to have you back on sometime in the future.
Beautiful. Thanks for having me. It's been a real adventure. It's been really fun, as the hallmark of all good adventures. So thanks for having me, and look forward to this spiraling and expanding and growing and touching the ears and lives of many. And I look forward to doing it again at some point now.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, go on, be adventurous. Click the subscribe button. Join us next week for a new adventure. Until then,